Hello everybody, my name is Stephan Haefele and I work as a soil scientist and agronomist at Rothamsted Research in Harpenden. Now I want to present today this topic, what is a good level of soil organic carbon and where can more carbon be stored, meaning in what soils can more carbon be stored. I will now remove the camera because that blocks some of the presentation, but I hope you see me now and then perhaps we'll see that again at the end. So, what is the issue? I think we all know that healthy and well-functioning soils are vital for sustainable and productive agriculture and a wide range of environmental services. We also do know, I think we all know, that soil organic carbon has positive effects on many soil properties and functions. These can be porosity, water storage, infiltration, nutrient storage, biodiversity, and all of these actually contribute to these environmental services, which are nowadays so important also in government programs. But a question which we couldn't really answer until recently is what is a good level of soil organic carbon for soils in the UK? And is it the same for all soils? Yes, the more the better, but that's about all we could say. This is why we were interested to develop a soil carbon index. So the amount of soil organic carbon stored in a soil depends on a whole range of soil characteristics. Even weather is important, of course the use of the land is important, but an important parameter is also texture. Why is that? Because organic matter particles bind to these small mineral particles, mainly clay and very fine silt particles, and this binding protects the soil organic carbon from mineralization, so it stays longer in the soil. We knew this. We went then to the literature and found that actually there's some studies have been done where one researcher said basically a relation of soil organic carbon to clay of 1 to 10 provides like the best match between soil organic carbon and clay. So most of the soil carbon is then bound to mineral particles and protected. If you have more soil organic carbon, it's less protected. If you have more clay, then you basically waste the capacity to protect carbon. Later on, some further studies were done, and they basically said, yes, there's also these thresholds of 1 to 8 and 1 to 13, which are shown here as the borderlines, the upper and the lower borderline here, which really are still giving you more information on the effect of this index on soil properties, like for example structure. So this system was existing. Here you have percent clay versus organic carbon. Below the purple line we say these are basically degraded soils. They have too low carbon contents. And above we have very good soils which have actually more carbon and can be very well protected in them. But how do soils in England and Wales measure up? To answer this question, we use an existing database, the National Soil Inventory of England and Wales, which was done 2 times, but here we talk about the first inventory, where basically the whole area was sampled every 5 kilometers in a grid. Soil samples were taken. They only took at the time the topsoil depth, 0 to 15 centimeters. This first sampling was conducted between 78 and 83. And from this whole set of data, we basically decided to exclude peat soils, because we thought peat soils are very different than normal mineral soils, and we don't include them here. And then we selected 4 land uses. So these are the 4 land uses: arable, lay grass, permanent grass, and woodland. And you can see here basically the distribution of these uses. Of course, as expected, you see more arable soils in the east. You see more permanent grassland in the west, and lay grass and woodland is basically scattered over the whole area. Next, we then basically plotted the data we had for these different uses into this system of thresholds of this carbon clay index. And this is the first graph for woodland, where you can see again here you have the concentration of clay and here of carbon, and you can see that basically all points are above this purple line, which is the threshold to degraded soils, and this is below the purple line. Only 5.6% are considered degraded soils. Close to 70% are considered very good soils. Going to the next use is permanent grass. The picture is similar, just more data. You can see really a lot of the permanent grass areas are very good. Few are degraded, and again here in numbers, 67% are very good soils with relation to their carbon status, carbon clay index. Only close to 7% are degraded. Next to lay grass, you see it degrades already a bit more. You have more selected points or sampled points which are in the degraded area, perhaps a little bit less, more in the middle, and you see that degraded already 15%, you would say, and about 50% are really here still in the very good range. And finally we get to arable soils, and you can clearly see a lot of the points are below the degraded line, still a lot also above in the very good range. When you look at the numbers, close to 40% we would say are degraded with respect to their soil organic carbon level, and only about 30% are still in the very good range. We then, here you see basically the same numbers from this first survey, which was conducted 78 to 83, and we compare this to the second survey, which was conducted for not all the points, but for quite a lot of the points which were sampled before. They were resampled in 94 to 2003, and you can see a similar distribution. Woodland even improved, less degraded soils, but for example arable soils still further degraded, so less very good soils, more degraded soils, 47% already, and the lay grass and permanent grass are somewhere there in the middle. We then also basically looked how management options can affect this index, this measured index, and we used for this the woven organic manuring experiment, a long-term experiment at one of the farms of Ross Hempstead Research. This here is actually a bit quite sandy soil, and the trial started not before 65 and is still running, but here the last data from 95. You see the three thresholds here, very good, down here degraded, and then different treatments. So fertilizer 1 and 2 treatments is basically two different inorganic fertilizer treatments for arable use, and you can see they're degrading a little bit in the beginning. This was arable land before, but then they basically stabilize down here. When you add straw, when you add straw, you can get actually quite a bit better, but then when you stop adding straw, you fall down again and again. Lay soils, a similar pattern, but still better. So if the lay period is included, soils improve. When the lay period is stopped, soils decrease, and the same here again. And the same here for farmyard manure application, quite a high application, I think 30 tons per hectare fresh weight. And here then even better for peat, but of course we don't want to mine peat to improve our soils. So what is our summary here? we think that the index, this soil organic carbon to clay index, works across England and Wales, all agricultural soils in diverse climates, so wet in the west, drier in the east, and that's actually quite special. So to have an index which, independent of the soil, works, independent of the use, works, is was quite a surprise for us. We therefore think that the SOC clay threshold is a simple way to gauge carbon status and identify degraded soils. We did, of course, find, I think that's obvious, that land use affects soil organic carbon clay index as well as structure, which then has effects on the water and nutrient storage capacities, which agrees with the literature. We did find substantial proportion of arable soils are degraded and could store considerable more carbon, but few permanent grass soils can do that. Lays somewhere in between, we have seen that. Something I didn't really mention is that for this analysis you actually do need standardized laboratory methods, which are not always the same as, for example, used in commercial labs. So for commercial labs often use loss on ignition to determine soil organic carbon, but it is not that exact. So we prefer to use to determine total organic carbon and inorganic carbon, and the difference is soil organic carbon. And with texture, the method which is recommended to really get good results is really the sieve and pipette method, which is quite expensive and also time consuming. How does this relate to carbon sequestration schemes? We have some projects in that area, and we actually found that there are very few paid carbon sequestration schemes for agriculture globally. Most are really for greenhouse gas emission in the industry. But we did find this brochure of the FAO, which actually provides a detailed method how such sequestration schemes could be established. A general principle in all these sequestration schemes is always additionality. That means that you have to change your management or in industry, your method, how you burn something, to actually then reduce carbon emission or to increase carbon storage in the soil. Just continuing business as usual and say, okay, I have a very good soil and I maintain that level, which a lot of people would say is a good thing to do, cannot be paid for under these schemes. So this is just how the rules are. And I'm not really sure what can be done against that, but that's what I can tell you now. I looked a bit at the literature to look at examples of management changes to increase carbon storage, with a specific look for pasture use. So it's very obviously from the data I showed you that changing management from arable to grassland can increase storage of carbon in soils. Changing from a ley system to permanent grass can also help putting carbon away, but less, of course. Then increasing the organic matter, which is produced under certain use, also helps. So anything like inorganic fertilizer, but also, of course, organic fertilizer applied, increasing the biomass, bringing more carbon into the soil, can increase carbon storage in soils. More productive grasses, deeper rooting species, these are options which are available for pasture use. And then, of course, the integration of pasture use with trees, silver pasture systems, or really the re-establishment of hedges. Hedges are basically like a forest and therefore have a very high potential to store carbon. With that, I thank for your attention and hope. I'm looking forward to the questions you will have next Tuesday when we talk about this topic again. Thanks very much. See you soon. Cheers.